My name is Jack Thompson. I always thought my life was the kind of life that other people envied. The sort of existence that inspired sitcoms and family movies. A solid marriage, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a precious 6-year-old daughter named Emily. Rebecca, my wife of 9 years, was my college sweetheart, the woman I thought I'd grow old with, trading glasses for bifocals and jogging sneakers for orthopedic shoes. Rebecca and I were partners in every sense of the word. We met as broke students, sharing ramen noodles and dreams about the future. We built everything together from scratch. I started my construction company, pouring my sweat and soul into it, while Rebecca became the rock of our family. She was the PTA mom, the one who knew every teacher at Emily's school by name, the one who smiled like a ray of sunshine at bake sales and charmed the neighbors at our backyard barbecues. Our lives ran like a well-oiled machine, or so I believed. I never imagined there was anything lurking beneath the surface. How could I? Emily's laughter echoed through our house, and Rebecca kissed me every morning as she handed me my travel mug of coffee. It was everything I could have ever wanted. Until one evening when everything began to unravel. That night, I came home a little earlier than usual. I had a surprise for Rebecca. 2 tickets to a Fleetwood Mac concert she had been raving about for months. She wasn't in the kitchen cooking dinner like she usually was. Instead, I found her sitting on the living room floor with Emily, surrounded by glitter, glue, and construction paper. They were making crafts for Emily's class. Rebecca looked up and smiled, her face lighting up the way it always did when she saw me. I handed her the tickets, watching as her face registered surprise, excitement, and then something else, something I couldn't quite place. Her smile faltered for a moment, a flicker so brief I might have missed it if I wasn't looking right at her. "Jack, these are amazing," she said, her voice almost too cheerful. "But, do you think we can make it another time?" I promised Emily I'd help her with this all evening. Something about the way she said it, the slight tremor in her voice, the way her eyes avoided mine, made me uneasy, but I shrugged it off. "Sure, no problem," I said, leaning down to kiss her on the cheek. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny flicker of hesitation, that almost imperceptible crack in her perfect facade, was the first sign. The first sign that my perfect life was about to shatter. The days that followed felt off. Nothing dramatic, just a series of little things that seemed strange when strung together. Rebecca, who was always so present, so engaged, suddenly felt like she was operating on autopilot. Her laughter seemed forced, and there was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there before. First, I chalked it up to stress. Being a mom, volunteering at the school, and keeping up with her book club and neighborhood committees had to be exhausting. But then came the late-night texts. It started a week after I gave her the concert tickets. We were in bed, and I was scrolling through my phone while Rebecca lay beside me, supposedly reading a novel. Her phone buzzed, lighting up with a notification. She quickly flipped it face down and mumbled something about it being a reminder from the school. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Something in the way her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water bottle. Something in the way she avoided looking at me when I asked what she was reading. I told myself I was imagining things, but doubt is a persistent parasite. Once it plants itself, it's hard to root out. The next evening, while Emily was at a sleepover, Rebecca went out to catch up with some friends. She left wearing a red dress I hadn't seen in years. It hugged her curves in a way that made her look stunning, dangerous. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. "You look great," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Thanks," she replied, her tone bright but dismissive. "Don't wait up for me, okay?" As I watched her walk out the door, something inside me stirred. An unfamiliar mix of unease and resentment. For the first time in years, I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. That night, I stayed awake longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling and wondering who Rebecca really was meeting. Her friends? Someone else? By the time I heard her come in just past midnight, I was too exhausted to confront her. "Did you have fun?" I asked from the bed as she tiptoed into the room. "Oh yeah," she replied, kicking off her heels. It was great. Good to catch up with the girls. She slipped into bed beside me, and the faintest hint of an unfamiliar cologne lingered in the air. I didn't sleep that night. After that night, my mind wouldn't rest. Felt like I was living with a stranger. And yet, Rebecca was still Rebecca. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, asked about my day when I got home, and played with Emily like the doting mother she had always been. But now I was paying attention to every detail, every nuance. It was on a Saturday afternoon, while cleaning the house, that I found it. The red flag that turned my uneasy feelings into full-blown suspicion. Emily and Rebecca were out shopping for school supplies, and I was in the bedroom, tidying up. Rebecca's nightstand drawer had been left partially open, and as I went to close it, my eyes caught on something unusual. A folded piece of paper tucked beneath her usual clutter of pens and loose change. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for it. Felt wrong, invasive, but curiosity got the better of me. The note was brief, scribbled in handwriting I didn't recognize. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Let's meet again soon. No name, no signature, just those words. I stared at the note for what felt like hours, the blood draining from my face. My fingers gripped the paper so tightly that it crumpled in my hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and a mix of anger and panic flooded my chest. Was it possible this was innocent? Could this have been some joke from her friends? A misunderstanding? But deep down, I knew better. When Rebecca and Emily came home later that day, I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eye. She acted like everything was normal, smiling and telling me about the deals she'd found on school supplies. I nodded, trying to keep my voice even, but the words from the note were seared into my mind. Last night was incredible. I started watching her closely after that, tracking her movements in subtle ways, checking how much gas was left in her car, taking note of the times she left and returned. I hated what I was becoming, but I couldn't help myself. And then came the next slip-up. It happened on a Tuesday evening. Rebecca was supposed to be taking Emily to her gymnastics class, but at the last minute, she said she'd run an errand, while Emily was practicing. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I went to pick Emily up, something I didn't usually do, I learned Rebecca hadn't been the one to drop her off. Another mom, Janice, had driven her instead. She said Rebecca was running late and asked me to take Emily, Janice said casually. Everything okay? I forced a smile and nodded. Yeah. She must have been caught up with something. Inside, I was seething. I drove Emily home, barely managing to hide my unease. Once she was settled with her favorite show on TV, I decided to call Rebecca. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Hey, honey, she said, her voice chipper. What's up? Where are you? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Still running errands, she replied without missing a beat. I'll be home soon. Janice said she dropped Emily off at gymnastics, I said, watching for a reaction. There was a pause, small but noticeable. Oh, right, Rebecca said. Her voice suddenly rushed. I was running late and didn't want her to miss class. I'll thank Janice later. Thanks for reminding me. Something about her tone, the slight wobble in her voice, struck me as off. Where exactly are you running errands? I pressed, my heart pounding. There was another pause. Just picking up a few things at the pharmacy. I'll be home in about 30 minutes. Do you need anything? No, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. See you soon. The call ended, but I didn't feel reassured. Instead, I felt like I was holding on to something slippery, something that was falling through my fingers no matter how tightly I gripped it. When Rebecca came home, I watched her carefully. She breezed in with a plastic bag from the pharmacy, a perfect performance of nonchalance. Got what I needed, she said, setting the bag on the counter. Emily already in bed? I nodded, but didn't respond. My eyes caught the receipt sticking out of the bag. It was time-stamped only 5 minutes before she walked through the door. Her 30-minute errand had barely taken 5. She noticed me staring and tilted her head. Everything okay? I forced a smile. Yeah, fine. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Something was happening, and Rebecca was slipping further and further away. The next morning, I made a decision that felt like a betrayal of everything I believed in. I installed a GPS tracker on Rebecca's car. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but at this point, I needed clarity more than I needed to preserve my pride. For the next week, I monitored her movements. Most of the time, her routine was exactly what you'd expect: school drop-offs, grocery runs, and the occasional coffee stop. But on Thursday, everything changed. That afternoon, while I was at the office, the tracker pinged an unfamiliar location. It wasn't the grocery store or the pharmacy. It was a small, out-of-the-way park on the edge of town. Rebecca didn't have a reason to be there. Emily wasn't with her, and as far as I knew, she didn't know anyone who lived nearby. My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen, the little blinking dot of her car taunting me. I told my assistant I had to leave early and drove straight to the park, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, her car was parked near the back, partially hidden by trees. I pulled into a space far enough away to avoid being noticed but close enough to watch. A few minutes later, I saw her. Rebecca was sitting on a bench, laughing, her hair catching the sunlight in a way that made her look radiant. But she wasn't alone. A man was with her, sitting close. Too close. He leaned in, saying something that made her laugh again, her hand brushing his arm. He was in his late 30s, athletic build, with that rugged charm you see in outdoor catalogs. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just casual. It wasn't platonic. The way they looked at each other made my stomach churn. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, watching their every move. They talked, laughed, and at one point, she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. That was it. The final confirmation. I wanted to storm out of the car and confront them, to demand an explanation, but something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the sick realization that I wasn't ready to hear whatever lie Rebecca would spin. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a photo. A single, damning image of my wife with another man. I drove home in silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. My hands shook as I parked in the driveway, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. That night, Rebecca acted like nothing had happened. She made dinner, helped Emily with her homework, and kissed me goodnight like she always did. But I couldn't bring myself to kiss her back. I stared at the ceiling for hours. The image of her with that man burned into my brain. The next day was agony. I could barely focus at work, my thoughts consumed by the image of Rebecca and that man. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be her, offering some confession or excuse. But nothing came. By the time I got home, I was determined to confront her. I wasn't sure what I'd say, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The charade was suffocating me. When I walked through the door, Emily greeted me with her usual bright smile, clutching a drawing she'd made at school. "Daddy, look, it's us at the beach," she exclaimed, holding up a crayon masterpiece. I crouched down to admire her work, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, her tone casual, as if nothing was wrong. I wanted to scream at her, to throw the photo I'd taken on the table and demand an explanation. But how could I do that with Emily sitting right there, so blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in our home? "Okay," I said instead, my voice tight. Dinner was torture. Rebecca chatted about her day, Emily babbled about her friends, and I sat there in silence, pushing food around my plate. Every time Rebecca looked at me, I felt the weight of what I'd seen. After we put Emily to bed, I followed Rebecca into the kitchen. She was loading the dishwasher, humming softly to herself, and the normalcy of it all made my skin crawl. "Rebecca," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She turned, startled. "Yeah." I opened my mouth, the words on the tip of my tongue. But then I saw it. Emily's drawing, taped to the refrigerator. A happy family of 3 standing under a blazing sun. My resolve crumbled. "Nothing," I muttered, shaking my head. "I'm just tired." Rebecca studied me for a moment, her brow furrowing. "Are you okay, Jack? You've seemed off the past few days." The nerve of her asking me that made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to nod. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just work stuff." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. "Okay," she said, turning back to the dishwasher. "Let me know if you want to talk." As I walked away, I hated myself for not saying anything. But I knew that when I finally confronted her, it couldn't be half-hearted. I needed answers, not deflections. And I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The photo on my phone felt like a ticking time bomb in my pocket. I didn't know when, but I knew the confrontation was coming. And when it did, there would be no turning back. The confrontation didn't happen the next day, or even the day after that. But the tension in the house was palpable, like an electrical charge waiting to spark. Rebecca carried on as if nothing was wrong, but I noticed the cracks in her performance. She was more careful with her phone, always keeping it close and silencing notifications. Her errands became more frequent, and her explanations for them increasingly vague. Then came the weekend, and with it, the moment I had been dreading. It was Saturday morning, and I was in the garage fixing a loose shelf when Emily came bounding in, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Daddy, Mommy said she's going to the store. Can we make cookies when she gets back?" I froze, the wrench slipping from my hand. "She's leaving now?" Emily nodded, oblivious to the tension in my voice. I heard Rebecca's footsteps approaching, her voice following close behind. "Jack, I'll be back in a couple of hours. Do you need anything from the store?" I stepped out of the garage just as she reached the car, her purse slung over her shoulder. She looked immaculate, her hair neatly styled and her makeup subtle but flawless. She wasn't dressed for a grocery run. "No," I said, my voice cold. "I'm good." Her eyes flickered, as if she sensed the weight behind my words. But she didn't linger. "Okay, see you soon." As her car backed out of the driveway, I pulled out my phone and opened the GPS tracker app. Sure enough, she wasn't heading to the store. She was driving toward the same park where I had seen her with that man. My chest tightened, fury and dread swirling into a toxic cocktail. I grabbed my keys and got into my truck, barely registering Emily's voice calling after me. It didn't take long to reach the park. I parked a few spaces away from Rebecca's car and waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. She wasn't alone. Through the gap in the trees, I saw them, Rebecca and the man from before. They were walking side by side, talking quietly, their faces close. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched her reach out and brush her hand against his. And then, as if to drive a stake through my chest, she kissed him. It wasn't quick or hesitant. It was the kind of kiss that belonged to lovers, the kind that made my stomach churn and my vision blur with rage. I sat there, frozen, every fiber of my being screaming to confront them. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my phone and took another photo. When they finally parted ways, Rebecca returned to her car, her face glowing with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen in months. She didn't see me as she drove past, and I stayed in the truck for a long time after she left, staring blankly at the dashboard. I knew then that there was no coming back from this. When I got home, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her stuffed bunny beside her as she colored with crayons. She looked up and smiled. "Did you get the cookie stuff, Daddy?" My throat tightened. I had almost forgotten her simple request amidst the storm in my head. "Not yet, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "But we'll do it later, okay?" She nodded, content, and went back to her drawing. I could hear Rebecca upstairs. The sound of the shower running told me she had just gotten back. I stood in the living room, staring at the stairs, wrestling with the urge to confront her then and there. But Emily's soft humming pulled me back. Not yet, I thought. Not in front of her. When Rebecca came downstairs, she was all smiles, her hair damp and falling around her shoulders. "Hey," she said brightly, kissing me on the cheek. "Everything okay?" I flinched at her touch, and her smile faltered. "Yeah," I said flatly, moving past her toward the kitchen. For the rest of the day, I couldn't look at her without seeing that kiss. Every time she laughed or smiled at Emily, I felt a bitter pang of betrayal. How could she act so normal? How could she play the role of the loving wife and mother so effortlessly when I knew what she was doing behind my back? By the time Emily was in bed, my patience had worn thin. Rebecca was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when I finally spoke. "Rebecca," I said, my voice tight. She looked up, her expression wary. "Yeah, we need to talk." She set her phone down slowly. "About what?" I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. The words were there, ready to burst out, but something held me back. I wasn't ready, not yet. "About us," I said finally. "You've been distant lately. Is there something going on?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she shifted uncomfortably. "Distant? What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "You're always out, running errands, or meeting friends I've never heard of. And you've been acting different." Rebecca's face hardened, and she crossed her arms. "I'm not acting different, Jack. If anyone's been distant, it's you. You've been quiet and moody for weeks. What's going on?" The audacity of her response nearly made me snap, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening, Rebecca. That's all." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Nothing is happening. I've just been busy. Maybe we're both a little stressed. Why don't we take a day for ourselves? Go out, just the two of us?" Her suggestion felt like a slap in the face. A day for ourselves? After what I'd seen that morning. But I nodded, swallowing my anger. "Maybe. Let's see." Rebecca smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Good. I'll plan something." I left the room without another word, my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists. She thought she could keep playing this game, but I was done playing. I spent the next few days in a haze, going through the motions at work and home while my mind churned with plans. Every time Rebecca smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, it felt like salt in an open wound. I didn't know how long I could keep up the charade. The evidence I had, photos of her with that man, the note I'd found in her drawer, felt like a pile of bricks pressing down on me. I carried them everywhere, tucked away in a folder in my briefcase, as if keeping them close would give me the strength to confront her. But I didn't want to just confront her. I wanted the truth. I needed her to say it out loud, to admit what she had done and face the damage she had caused. And so I planned. On Friday night, I told Rebecca I had to work late, which wasn't entirely untrue. I was finalizing a proposal for a new client, but my real goal was to give her the space to do what I suspected she would. Sure enough, the GPS tracker on her car pinged around 7:30 p.m., leading me to the same park. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. I knew who she was meeting, and I knew what they were doing. Instead, I stayed at the office, staring at the folder on my desk. My fingers hovered over my phone, tempted to call her and demand answers, but I held back. Confronting her over the phone felt weak. Cowardly. No, this needed to happen face to face. When I got home around 9:30, the house was dark. Rebecca's car was in the driveway, and the lights in the bedroom were off. I walked in quietly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. She was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I could tell by the way her breathing hitched when I opened the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at her silhouette in the moonlight. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, and for a brief second, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the kiss, the way she smiled at him, the way she laughed like he was the center of her world. I turned and left the room, the anger bubbling just below the surface. The confrontation would come soon, but not tonight. The confrontation happened on Sunday morning. I woke up early, my mind racing with everything I'd held inside for weeks. Rebecca was still asleep, her face serene in the morning light, and Emily was in the living room watching cartoons. It was the perfect storm of opportunity and anger. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stared at the folder on the counter. Inside were the photos, the note, and a detailed log of every GPS ping I had tracked. Felt like a court case waiting to be tried. Rebecca walked in a few minutes later, wearing one of my old sweatshirts and her hair in a messy bun. She smiled at me, looking like the woman I married. "Morning," she said, heading for the coffee pot. I didn't answer. She paused, turning to look at me. "Jack, are you okay?" It was the question that broke me. I slammed my mug down on the counter, the sound making her jump. "No, Rebecca, I'm not okay," I said, my voice low but trembling with fury. Her eyes widened. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" I pulled the folder from the counter and tossed it onto the table between us. "Why don't you tell me, Rebecca? What's been happening?" She stared at the folder, her face pale. For a moment, she didn't move, as if frozen in place. "Jack, what is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's proof," I said coldly. "Proof that you've been lying to me, that you've been seeing someone else." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Slowly, she reached for the folder, her hands trembling as she opened it. The photos stared back at her, damning and undeniable. "Jack," she began, her voice cracking. "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't try to lie to me. I saw you, at the park, with him. I watched you kiss him, Rebecca." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. "Jack, who is he?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long has this been going on?" She shook her head, the tears spilling over. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. I laughed bitterly. "Not what I think. Are you kidding me? I've been tracking you, Rebecca. I've seen where you go, who you're with. So don't insult me by pretending this is nothing." She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. It's not serious," she choked out. "It's just, I don't even know what it is." "Not serious?" I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You kissed him like he was the love of your life. Is that what you call not serious?" "I don't know," she cried, looking up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I've been confused, Jack. Lost. I didn't mean for this to happen." Emily's voice called from the living room, a cheerful interruption that cut through the tension like a knife. "Mommy? Daddy? Can I have breakfast?" Rebecca looked at me, pleading silently, but I didn't soften. "Go," I said through gritted teeth. "Make her breakfast." She hesitated, then got up and left the room, leaving me standing there with the weight of her betrayal crushing down on me. As Rebecca disappeared into the kitchen to tend to Emily, I stayed in the dining room, staring at the folder on the table. The dam of emotions I had been holding back for weeks threatened to burst, but I clenched my fists and forced myself to hold it together. Emily's cheerful chatter echoed down the hall, a cruel reminder of the fragile normalcy we were shattering. How could Rebecca betray not just me, but the family we had built together? When she finally returned, her eyes were red, her face a mask of exhaustion and guilt. She sat across from me, avoiding my gaze as she reached for the folder again. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "Or Emily. I don't know how it got to this point." "Don't you?" I shot back, the anger bubbling up again. "You didn't think sneaking around, kissing another man, wouldn't hurt us? What did you think would happen, Rebecca?" "I wasn't thinking," she said, shaking her head. "I was just, I don't know. I felt like I was losing myself, Jack. I felt invisible." "Invisible," I said, the bitterness sharp in my tone. "So what? You thought the solution was to cheat? To lie to me? To risk blowing up our family?" She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. It was just someone who made me feel seen, like I mattered." Her words stung, but they didn't absolve her. "And I didn't make you feel that way?" I asked, my voice trembling. "After everything we've built, everything we've been through, you didn't think you mattered to me?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, the betrayal. "What do you want me to do, Rebecca?" I said, my voice cold. Pretend this never happened? Sweep it under the rug and go back to playing happy family? No, she said, her voice muffled. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I love you, Jack. I love our family. I don't want to lose you. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You should have thought of that before you threw it all away. Silence hung between us like a heavy fog, suffocating and impenetrable. Finally, I stood, grabbing the folder and tucking it under my arm. I need space, I said. I need time to figure out what I'm going to do. But don't think for a second that things can just go back to the way they were. Rebecca looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Jack, please. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. You made your choice. Now I have to figure out mine. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold morning air stinging my skin as I sank onto the porch steps. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the horizon as the weight of everything threatened to crush me. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, wandering through the town without a destination. I found myself in a park, sitting on a bench while children played on the swings and couples strolled hand in hand. It felt surreal, like I was watching a world I no longer belonged to. By the time I returned home, the house was eerily quiet. Emily was in her room, the soft hum of a cartoon playing behind her closed door. Rebecca was sitting on the couch, staring at a family photo on the mantel. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen. Jack, she said, her voice breaking. We need to talk. I stayed by the doorway, keeping the distance between us. I'm not sure there's anything left to say. There is, she said, standing. I owe you the truth. All of it. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered leaving. But something inside me needed to hear it. I sat down in the armchair across from her, my arms crossed. Talk, I said. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. His name is Matt. We met at a friend's barbecue months ago. Started as nothing, just small talk. But then, I don't know, I started looking forward to seeing him, talking to him. And then, her voice faltered, and she looked away. And then you decided to throw away our marriage for him. I finished for her, my tone icy. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. I wasn't thinking about it as throwing anything away. I was just so lost, Jack. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. And then I made a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. I shook my head, the anger bubbling up again. Do you even realize what you've done? To me? To Emily? This isn't just a mistake, Rebecca. It's a betrayal. She sank back onto the couch, her body racked with sobs. I know, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But I need you to know that it didn't mean anything. He didn't mean anything. You're the one I love, Jack. You're the one I want to be with. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. For so long, I had believed in us, in our family. And now, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an uncertain abyss. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice hollow. I need time. Space. Rebecca nodded, her tears falling freely. Take whatever you need, she whispered. But please, don't give up on us. Don't give up on Emily. I stood and left the room, her sobs echoing behind me as I climbed the stairs. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling as my mind replayed everything. Her words, her tears, the photos. I thought of Emily, of the life we had built together, and of the uncertain road ahead. By morning, I had made my decision. Rebecca and I would separate. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. But for Emily's sake, I would try to co-parent with civility. She deserved stability, even if her parents couldn't provide her with the perfect home. As I packed my bags, Rebecca stood silently in the doorway, her eyes filled with regret. Where are you going? She asked softly. To a hotel, I said. I'll call in a few days to figure out the next steps. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I'm sorry, Jack, for everything. I didn't respond. Couldn't. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the life we had lost, and relief that I could finally begin to rebuild. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, I would find my way forward. If you like our content, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.